The rope burns on Beatrice Fletcher's neck had faded to pale scars by the time she returned to Fort Bowie, Arizona. But the memory of watching her husband swing from the gallows still woke her every night in a cold sweat. She had begged the crowd for mercy as they dragged Thomas to the hanging tree, but no one would meet her eyes then, and no one would meet them now as she walked down the dusty main street with her carpetbag clutched tight against her chest. The autumn sun beat down mercilessly in 1878, turning the desert town into an oven, and sweat trickled down her spine beneath the black mourning dress that marked her as a widow at 23 years old. She had nowhere else to go, no family to take her in, and the small house on the edge of town was all she had left of the life she had built with Thomas before everything fell apart. The whispers started the moment she stepped off the stagecoach. Women pulled their children closer and turned their backs. Men spat tobacco juice into the dirt and muttered words she was glad she could not quite hear. Beatrice kept her chin up and her eyes forward, forcing one foot in front of the other even though her legs trembled with each step. The general store owner saw her coming and flipped the sign to closed, though it was barely past noon. The banker crossed the street to avoid passing her on the boardwalk. A group of children threw stones that landed at her feet, and their mothers did nothing to stop them. Thomas had been accused of rustling cattle from the Morrison Ranch, the biggest spread in the territory. The evidence had been circumstantial at best, but the Morrisons were powerful, and when they wanted someone hanged, judges and juries tended to agree. Beatrice had screamed his innocence until her voice gave out, but it had done no good. They had strung him up 3 months ago, and she had fled to her cousin's place in Tucson rather than face the shame alone. But her cousin's husband had made it clear she was not welcome to stay, and so here she was, walking back into the town that had killed her husband and would gladly see her dead too. The house looked smaller than she remembered, the paint more faded, the garden more overgrown with desert scrub. Someone had broken the front window, and glass littered the porch. Beatrice set down her bag and began sweeping the shards with a broom she found leaning against the wall, her movements mechanical, her mind numb. She had no idea how she would survive. Thomas had done odd jobs around town, but no one would hire her now. She had a little money saved, enough for maybe a month if she was careful, but after that, she did not know what would happen. She was carrying water from the well when she heard the horse approaching. Beatrice looked up to see a tall man on a bay gelding, his hat pulled low against the sun. He was lean and weathered, probably in his late 20s, with the kind of easy posture in the saddle that came from spending more time on horseback than on foot. As he drew closer, she saw his eyes were a startling blue-green, like the ocean in a painting she had once seen, and his jaw was covered in several days' worth of stubble. He wore a dusty trail coat and chaps, and a Winchester rifle rested in the scabbard on his saddle. Beatrice braced herself for another insult, another cruel word, but the cowboy simply touched the brim of his hat as he passed. The gesture was so unexpected, so normal that she nearly dropped the bucket. She watched him ride past, confusion washing over her. No one had acknowledged her with anything but contempt since she had arrived. Who was this man who treated her like a human being? She did not have long to wonder. As she struggled to carry the heavy bucket up the porch steps, she heard boots on the dirt behind her. Beatrice turned to find the cowboy had dismounted and was walking toward her, his horse's reins in one hand. "Madam, that looks heavy. Mind if I help?" His voice was deep and quiet, with a slight drawl that suggested he was from Texas or maybe Oklahoma. Beatrice stared at him. "You know who I am." "I reckon I can guess, given how folks were treating you on the street." He gestured to the bucket. "Still looks heavy. Why would you help me? Everyone else in this town wants me gone." The cowboy was silent for a moment, his eyes steady on hers. My mama raised me to help folks who need helping. The color of their reputation does not much matter to me. He stepped forward and took the bucket from her hands before she could protest. Name's Nathan Emerson. I work for the Cross T Ranch about 15 miles north of here. Beatrice Fletcher. She watched him carry the water up the steps with ease, his movements efficient and practiced. Thank you. Where do you want it? Kitchen table is fine. She followed him inside, acutely aware of how improper it was to have a strange man in her house, but also too tired to care much about propriety. Nathan set the bucket down gently, then looked around the dusty interior. Someone had ransacked the place while she was gone. Furniture was overturned, dishes broken, her few belongings scattered across the floor. His jaw tightened. Folks around here got no sense of decency. They think my husband was a thief and a rustler. In their minds, I deserve this. Beatrice bent to pick up a shattered picture frame, the glass cutting into her finger. She hissed in pain, and Nathan was beside her in an instant, pulling a clean handkerchief from his pocket. Let me see. He took her hand carefully, wrapping the cloth around the cut. His hands were calloused but gentle, and Beatrice felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest. It had been so long since anyone had touched her with kindness. I can manage, she said, but she did not pull away. I am sure you can. Does not mean you should have to. Nathan secured the handkerchief and released her hand, then began righting the overturned chairs. You got anyone to help you get this place sorted? No, it is just me. He nodded slowly, as if making a decision. Well then, I guess you got me for the afternoon. I was just passing through on my way back to the ranch, but another few hours would not hurt. I cannot pay you. Did I ask for payment? Nathan picked up a broken chair and examined it. This can be fixed. You got any tools? Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She would not cry in front of this stranger, no matter how kind he was being. There's a toolbox in the shed out back if someone has not stolen it. They worked together through the afternoon, speaking little but moving in a surprisingly comfortable rhythm. Nathan repaired what he could and swept up the debris from what could not be saved. Beatrice washed the dishes that had survived and started putting the house back into some semblance of order. The sun was setting by the time they finished, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and purple. Nathan stood on the porch, settling his hat back on his head. You going to be all right here alone? I do not have much choice. There's always choices. Might not like them much, but they are there. He swung up into his saddle with practiced ease. I come through town most Saturdays for supplies. If you need anything, you let me know. Why are you doing this? Beatrice asked. You do not know me. You do not know if what they say about Thomas is true or not. Nathan looked down at her, his expression thoughtful. I knew your husband, actually. Not well, but enough to talk to when I saw him at the livery. He seemed like a decent man. More importantly, even if every word they said about him was true, that would not be your fault. You should not have to pay for someone else's sins. With that, he touched his hat brim again and rode off into the gathering darkness. Beatrice watched until he disappeared from sight, then went back inside and locked the door. For the first time since returning to Fort Bowie, she felt a tiny spark of something that might have been hope. The next few days passed in a blur of hard work and harder silences. Beatrice tried to find employment, but every door closed in her face. The seamstress claimed she had no need for help. The restaurant owner told her to leave before she drove away customers. Even the saloon, which employed women of questionable reputation, refused her services. The message was clear. Fort Bowie wanted her to starve, to give up and leave, preferably to die somewhere out of sight. She began selling what little she owned, a silver brush that had belonged to her mother. a quilt her grandmother had made. The carved wooden box Thomas had given her for their first anniversary. The shopkeepers paid her a fraction of what the items were worth, knowing she had no leverage to bargain. Her money was running out faster than she had feared. Saturday came, and with it, Nathan Emerson. Beatrice was in the garden, trying to coax some late-season vegetables from the hard earth when she heard his horse. She stood, brushing dirt from her skirt, and felt an unwelcome flutter in her stomach. She should not be happy to see him. She should not look forward to his visits. It had only been a week since Thomas died, and proper mourning required at least a year of solitude and grief. But her heart did not seem to care about propriety, and it lifted at the sight of Nathan's tall form swinging down from his saddle. "Morning, Mrs. Fletcher." He carried a burlap sack which he set on the porch steps. "I had extra supplies, and I thought you could use them." Beatrice looked in the sack and found flour, beans, salt pork, coffee, and even a small bag of sugar. She knew immediately that these were not extra supplies. Nathan had bought them for her, and the knowledge brought a lump to her throat. "I cannot accept this." "Why not?" "Because it is charity, and I still have my pride if nothing else." Nathan leaned against the porch railing, his expression patient. "If you want to call it charity, go ahead. I call it neighborly. Besides, if it makes you feel better, you can pay me back someday when you are on your feet again. And if that day never comes, then I will consider it money well spent." He glanced at the garden. "You getting anything to grow in this hardpan?" "Not much. The soil is terrible, and I think someone poisoned the well while I was gone. The water tastes strange." Nathan frowned. "That is low, even for folks bent on cruelty. I will take a look at it before I go." He paused, then added, "I also came to ask if you might want to ride out to the Cross T with me. Boss's wife is looking for someone to help with mending and laundry. It is not much, but it would be honest work and honest pay." Beatrice felt hope flare in her chest, then immediately dim. "Your boss knows who I am," I told him. "He said he does not care about gossip, only about whether you can sew a straight seam." "I can sew." Beatrice had made all her own clothes since she was 12 years old. "But how would I get there? It is 15 miles, you said." "You can ride with me today, see if it suits you. If it does, we will figure out transportation. Maybe you can stay at the ranch during the week and come back here on Sundays." It was a lifeline, and Beatrice knew better than to refuse it. "Give me 10 minutes to change and pack a bag." The ride to the Cross T Ranch was the longest stretch of peace Beatrice had known in months. The desert landscape rolled past in shades of tan and rust, dotted with sagebrush and the occasional prickly pear cactus. Nathan kept his horse at an easy walk so Beatrice's smaller mare, which he had borrowed from the ranch, could keep pace. They talked little, but the silence was comfortable rather than awkward. Nathan pointed out landmarks and told her stories about the ranch, his voice low and soothing. Beatrice found herself relaxing for the first time since Thomas's arrest, the knots in her shoulders gradually loosening. The Cross T was bigger than she had expected, with a large main house, several outbuildings, and a bunkhouse for the ranch hands. Cattle dotted the distant hills, their lowing carried on the dry wind. Nathan led her to the main house and introduced her to Matthew Cross, the ranch owner, and his wife, Catherine. Catherine was a plump, cheerful woman in her 40s with graying hair and kind eyes. She looked Beatrice up and down, not with judgment but with assessment. "Nathan says you can sew," Catherine said. "Can you also do laundry without shrinking my husband's shirts?" "Yes, madam." "Can you cook?" "Well enough to keep myself fed. I am no expert," Catherine smiled. "Honest, at least." "I like that. Come inside and I will show you what needs doing." The work was hard but not unbearable. Beatrice spent the day mending torn shirts and trousers, her needle flying through the fabric with practiced ease. Catherine brought her lunch and sat with her while she ate, chatting about the ranch and her 3 grown sons, who all worked the cattle. She did not mention Thomas or the hanging, and Beatrice was grateful for the reprieve. When evening came, Catherine pressed $2 into her hand and told her to come back the following Saturday. "You are welcome to stay the night in the spare room rather than ride back in the dark," Catherine offered. "Nathan can take you home in the morning." Beatrice hesitated, then agreed. The thought of riding back through the darkness was not appealing, and besides, she was exhausted. Catherine showed her to a small but clean bedroom, and Beatrice fell asleep almost as soon as her head hit the pillow. She dreamed of Thomas, as she always did, but for once the dream was not a nightmare. He was smiling at her, telling her it was all right to move forward, to live. She woke to the smell of bacon and coffee. Catherine had prepared a huge breakfast, and Beatrice ate until she was uncomfortably full, storing up the calories against the lean days ahead. Nathan appeared as she was finishing, his hat in his hands, his hair damp from washing. "Ready to head back?" he asked. The ride home was slower than the ride out had been, as if neither of them was eager for it to end. Nathan told her about his life, how he had come west from Tennessee after the war, looking for a fresh start. He had worked a dozen different ranches before landing at the Cross T 5 years ago. He liked the work, liked the open spaces, liked the way the desert changed colors with the shifting light. Beatrice found herself telling him about her own past, how she had grown up in St. Louis, the daughter of a shopkeeper. She had met Thomas when he passed through on his way west, and she had been so taken with his stories of adventure and opportunity that she had agreed to marry him and make the journey to Arizona. "You regret it?" Nathan asked quietly. Beatrice considered the question. "I regret how it ended. But I do not regret loving him or the years we had together. They were good years, mostly. We were happy. That is more than most folks get. Do you have someone?" The question was out before Beatrice could stop it, and she felt her cheeks heat. "I am sorry, that was too personal." "No, it is all right. I do not have anyone. Came close once back in Tennessee, but she married someone else while I was off fighting. By the time I got home, she had 2 babies and a husband who had managed to avoid conscription. I figured it was a sign I was meant to be a wanderer." "Do you get lonely?" Nathan was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes. But loneliness is better than being with the wrong person. I have seen enough bad marriages to know that much." They reached Fort Bowie as the sun reached its zenith, turning the town into a shimmering mirage. Nathan insisted on seeing her to her door, despite the stares and whispers that followed them down the street. He carried the supplies he had brought the previous day inside for her, then lingered on the porch. "I will see you next Saturday," he asked, "if Mrs. Cross will have me back." "She will. She told me you are the best seamstress she has seen in years." Nathan settled his hat on his head. "In the meantime, if you need anything, you can leave a message for me at the telegraph office. The operator is my cousin's husband, and he is a decent sort. He will make sure I get it." "Thank you, Nathan, for everything." He touched his hat brim and rode away. Beatrice stood on the porch and watched him go, feeling that strange flutter in her chest again. It was too soon, she told herself. Too soon to feel anything for anyone. But the heart kept its own schedule, and hers was clearly not interested in following the rules of proper mourning. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern. Beatrice worked at the Cross T Ranch on Saturdays, sometimes staying over until Sunday afternoon. Catherine paid her fairly and always sent her home with extra food. The other ranch hands accepted her presence without comment, though she caught Nathan watching her sometimes when he thought she was not looking. His gaze was not predatory or cruel, like so many men's gazes had been since Thomas's death. It was curious, gentle, perhaps a little wistful. In town, the hostility continued but began to lose its edge. People still avoided her, still refused to do business with her directly, but the active cruelty lessened. No more broken windows, no more garbage thrown on her porch. Beatrice suspected Nathan had something to do with it, though he never said anything. She heard through the telegraph operator, who turned out to be a kind man named Samuel, that Nathan had gotten into a fistfight with one of the Morrison ranch hands who had been spreading particularly vicious rumors about her. Nathan had broken the man's nose and told him that anyone who wanted to talk badly about Mrs. Fletcher would have to go through him first. The knowledge warmed Beatrice even as it worried her. She did not want Nathan to suffer for defending her. The Morrisons were powerful and they did not forget slights. But when she tried to bring it up, Nathan just shrugged and changed the subject. Winter came to the desert, bringing cold nights and the occasional frost. Beatrice's money was nearly gone, despite her work at the Cross T. The house needed repairs she could not afford, and her clothes were wearing thin. She began to seriously consider leaving Fort Bowie, perhaps heading to California, where no one knew her story. But the thought of leaving made her chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with Thomas's memory, and everything to do with a tall cowboy with sea-colored eyes. It was early December when Nathan showed up at her door on a Tuesday evening, his face grim. Beatrice invited him in, her heart already sinking. She knew bad news when she saw it. "There is talk in town," Nathan said without preamble. "The Morrisons are pushing the sheriff to evict you from this house. They claim Thomas owed them money for the cattle they said he stole, and that the house should be sold to pay the debt. Can they do that? In a fair world, no. But Sheriff Hawkins is in the Morrisons' pocket and the judge is not much better. I think they will try." Nathan paced the small kitchen, his hands clenched into fists. "You cannot let them take this house, Beatrice. It is all you have." It was the first time he had used her given name, and despite the circumstances, Beatrice felt a thrill run through her. "What can I do?" "I have no money for a lawyer, and even if I did, no lawyer would take a case against the Morrisons." "Then you need to prove Thomas was innocent. Clear his name and they lose their leverage." "And how do I do that? The trial is over, the verdict rendered. Thomas is dead and buried." Nathan stopped pacing and looked at her intently. "I have been thinking about that. The evidence against Thomas was thin. A couple of Morrison ranch hands claimed they saw him with stolen cattle, but there was no physical proof, no brands that matched, nothing solid. It always struck me as convenient that they found him guilty so fast." "You think he was innocent?" Beatrice felt tears sting her eyes. "Truly, I do. And I think someone else was rustling those cattle, someone the Morrisons were happy to blame Thomas for. If we can find out who really did it, we can clear his name." Nathan met her gaze steadily. "I am not going to let you fight this alone." "Why?" Beatrice asked, her voice breaking. "Why do you care so much? You barely knew Thomas, and you have only known me a few months. Why risk everything to help me?" He crossed the room in 3 long strides and took her hands in his. "Because you matter, Beatrice. Because watching you suffer while this whole damn town turns its back makes me sick to my stomach. Because when I see you, I see someone brave and strong and decent, and I cannot stand by and watch them destroy you. Nathan, She did not know what to say. The words stuck in her throat, tangled up with grief and guilt and a growing affection she had no right to feel. "You do not have to say anything. Just let me help you, please." Beatrice nodded, not trusting her voice. Nathan squeezed her hands gently, then released them and stepped back. "I am going to do some asking around," he said. "Quietly, so the Morrisons do not catch wind of it. In the meantime, you keep your head down and do not give them any excuse to move against you faster." He left shortly after, and Beatrice sat alone in the gathering darkness, her mind spinning. Part of her wanted to tell Nathan to stop, to not risk himself for a lost cause. But a larger part, the part that was tired of being beaten down and blamed for crimes she did not commit, wanted to fight back. If there was even a chance of clearing Thomas's name and securing her future in Fort Bowie, she had to take it. The next few weeks were tense. Nathan came by whenever he could, always after dark so as not to attract attention. He had been talking to people, he told her, ranch hands and drifters and the bartender at the saloon who heard everything. A picture was starting to emerge. In the months before Thomas's arrest, several ranches in the area had reported missing cattle. The Morrisons had lost the most, but they were also the biggest operation. 2 smaller ranches had lost stock as well, but those thefts had stopped after Thomas was hanged. "That struck me as odd," Nathan said, warming his hands on the cup of coffee Beatrice had made him. "If there was an organized rustling operation, why would it stop just because one man got hanged? Unless that man was working alone, which seems unlikely given the scale of the thefts." "Maybe whoever was really doing it got scared and stopped," Beatrice suggested. "Maybe. Or maybe they got what they wanted." "What do you mean?" Nathan leaned forward, his eyes intense in the lamplight. "What if the rustling was never about the cattle? What if it was about getting rid of Thomas?" Beatrice stared at him. "But why? Thomas had no enemies. He was just a man trying to make a living same as everyone else. That is what I need to figure out. Did Thomas have any property besides this house? Any claims or investments? He filed a mining claim once out near Copper Creek. But he never did anything with it. He said the vein was not worth pursuing." Nathan's expression sharpened. "Where exactly was this claim?" "I am not sure. He showed me the papers once, but I did not pay much attention. I thought it was just another of his schemes that would not pan out." Beatrice went to the small desk in the corner and began rifling through the drawers. The papers should be here somewhere. It took half an hour of searching, but she finally found them. A mining claim filed 2 years ago for a section of land about 20 miles northeast of Fort Bowie. Nathan studied the claim carefully, his brow furrowed. "I know this area," he said slowly. "It is right at the edge of Morrison property, and I heard talk recently that the Morrisons have been buying up mining claims in that region. Something about copper deposits that might be worth more than anyone realized." Understanding dawned on Beatrice like a cold sunrise. They wanted Thomas's claim, and when he would not sell, they found a way to take it. But how? The claim was in his name. His death would not transfer it to them. Nathan's jaw tightened. It would if his widow sold it to them, especially if that widow was desperate and had no other options. Rage, pure and hot, swept through Beatrice. They had murdered her husband for a mining claim. They had destroyed her life, her reputation, everything she had, all for the possibility of copper in the ground. What do? We prove it. If we can show that the Morrisons had a motive to frame Thomas, and if we can find evidence that someone else was actually doing the rustling, we might be able to get the case reopened. That is a lot of ifs, I know, but it is a chance. They worked together through the winter, pieces of the puzzle slowly falling into place. Nathan learned through his contacts that the Morrison Ranch had hired several new hands right around the time the rustling started. Men with questionable backgrounds who had left the area shortly after Thomas's hanging. One of them, a man named Jack Holloway, had been seen in a saloon in Tucson, drunk and talking about a job he had pulled where he got paid to steal cattle and make sure some poor fool took the blame. Nathan rode to Tucson and found Holloway, now working as a bouncer at a gambling hall. It took several whiskeys and some careful conversation, but Nathan eventually got Holloway to admit that he had been paid by Morrison's foreman to rustle the cattle, and make sure Thomas Fletcher was seen in the area when it happened. Holloway thought it was a joke, just a way to scare Fletcher into selling some property Morrison wanted. He claimed he had not known they would actually hang the man. Getting Holloway to testify was another matter. He was scared, and with good reason. The Morrisons had a long reach and a vengeful streak. But Nathan was persuasive, and he had a strong sense of justice that appealed to whatever conscience Holloway still possessed. Eventually, Holloway agreed to sign a sworn statement detailing what he had done and who had paid him to do it. Armed with this evidence, Nathan and Beatrice went to see Judge Harrison, the circuit judge who would be in Fort Bowie the following month. Harrison was known to be fair, if not particularly brave. They presented him with Holloway's statement, the mining claim documents, and a written account of all the inconsistencies in the original trial. Harrison listened carefully, his expression grave. "This is serious business," he said when they finished. "Accusing the Morrisons of conspiracy to commit murder is not something I can take lightly." "We are not asking you to take it lightly," Nathan said. "We are asking you to take it seriously. An innocent man was hanged, and his widow has been made to suffer for a crime he did not commit. That is not justice." Harrison studied them both for a long moment. "I will need to verify this man Holloway's statement. If it holds up, I will order a new investigation. But I warn you, even if everything you say is true, getting a conviction against the Morrisons will be nearly impossible. They have too much money and too much influence." "We are not looking for a conviction," Beatrice said quietly. "We are looking for the truth. If we can prove Thomas was innocent, that is enough." The judge nodded slowly. "Give me 2 weeks to look into this. I will send word when I have made a decision." Those 2 weeks were the longest of Beatrice's life. She tried to continue with her normal routine, working at the Cross Tea on Saturdays and keeping to herself the rest of the time. But anxiety ate at her constantly. What if the judge decided there was not enough evidence? What if the Morrisons found out about the investigation and retaliated? What if Holloway changed his story or disappeared? Nathan seemed to sense her worry, because he found excuses to come by nearly every evening. Sometimes he brought supplies or helped with repairs around the house. Other times he just sat with her, talking about nothing in particular, his presence a steady comfort. They did not speak about what was growing between them, but Beatrice could feel it like a living thing, warm and bright and terrifying. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the desert, Nathan said, "What will you do if the judge clears Thomas's name?" "Will you stay in Fort Bowie?" Beatrice considered the question. "I do not know. Part of me wants to leave to go somewhere no one knows my story, but another part of me does not want to give them the satisfaction of driving me away. And if I asked you to stay, what would you say then?" She turned to look at him, her heart pounding. "Why would you ask me that?" Nathan met her gaze steadily. "I think you know why, Beatrice. It has only been 6 months since Thomas died. It is too soon. For some folks, maybe, but grief does not follow a schedule. You loved your husband and you mourned him, but he is gone and you are still here, still living. There is no shame in wanting to keep living. People will talk. People are already talking. Let them." He reached over and took her hand, his touch sending warmth up her arm. "I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow, Beatrice. I am just asking you to think about the possibility. To consider that maybe there is a future here that includes more than just survival." Beatrice looked down at their joined hands, Thomas's face rising in her memory. But for once, the image did not bring pain. Instead, she felt a sense of peace, as if he was giving her permission to move forward. "I will think about it," she said softly. The judge's decision came 3 days before Christmas. He had verified Holloway's statement and interviewed several other witnesses, who confirmed that the evidence against Thomas had been manufactured. While he could not overturn the hanging, he could issue a formal declaration that Thomas Fletcher had been wrongfully convicted and executed. The declaration would be published in the territorial newspaper and entered into the court records. Furthermore, Judge Harrison ordered Sheriff Hawkins to investigate the Morrisons' role in the rustling and the false accusation. The sheriff, realizing which way the wind was blowing, actually did his job for once. Within a week, Morrison's foreman had been arrested, and 2 of the ranch hands who had testified against Thomas had admitted they had been paid to lie. The case against the Morrisons themselves was harder to prove, but the damage to their reputation was done. Suddenly, no one in Fort Bowie wanted to do business with them. Banks called in loans, suppliers refused credit, and ranch hands started looking for work elsewhere. For Beatrice, the vindication was bittersweet. Thomas was still dead, still in the ground, and nothing could bring him back. But his name was cleared, and that meant something. It meant that when people spoke of him, they would not call him a thief and a rustler. It meant that she could hold her head high without shame. The change in the town's treatment of her was immediate and dramatic. The same people who had shunned her for months suddenly wanted to apologize, to make amends. The general store owner offered her credit. The seamstress asked if she wanted a job. Women who had crossed the street to avoid her now stopped to chat. Beatrice accepted their apologies with grace, but she did not forget how easily they had turned on her. She did not forget who had stood by her when no one else would. Christmas came, and Catherine Cross invited Beatrice to spend it at the ranch. The house was full of warmth and laughter, with Catherine's 3 sons and their families creating a joyful chaos. Nathan was there too, and Beatrice caught him watching her throughout the day, his expression soft and hopeful. After dinner, he asked her to take a walk with him, and she agreed. They strolled through the cold desert night, their breath misting in the air. The stars above were impossibly bright, undimmed by any city lights. Nathan led her to the corral fence and leaned against it, looking out at the horses dozing in the moonlight. "I have been thinking," he said slowly, "about what I said before about you staying. I know it is still early and I do not want to rush you, but I also do not want to let fear keep me from saying what is in my heart." Beatrice's pulse quickened. "What is in your heart, Nathan?" He turned to face her fully, his eyes searching hers. "That I have fallen in love with you. That I think about you every waking moment and dream about you when I sleep. That when I imagine my future, you are in it, and when I imagine it without you, everything seems empty and gray." He paused, then added softly, "I know you love Thomas, and I am not asking you to forget him or to stop mourning, but I am asking you to consider that maybe your heart has room for someone else too." Tears spilled down Beatrice's cheeks, but they were not tears of grief. They were tears of relief and joy and a cautious, fragile hope. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have been trying not to, telling myself it was too soon, that I was betraying Thomas's memory. But the truth is, you have made me feel alive again. You have given me a reason to keep fighting, to keep believing that life can be good." Nathan pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, resting her head against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, strong and steady, and she matched her breathing to its rhythm. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's warmth, neither wanting to break the spell. "Will you marry me?" Nathan asked finally, his voice rough with emotion. "Not tomorrow, not even next month, but someday when you are ready, will you be my wife?" "Yes," Beatrice said, her voice clear and certain. "Someday when I am ready, I will marry you." They courted properly after that, despite the fact that everyone in town knew they were in love. Nathan came to call every Sunday, sitting in Beatrice's small parlor and talking about their hopes and dreams. He brought her flowers when he could find them, and once, a beautiful turquoise necklace he had bought from a traveling merchant. Beatrice cooked dinner for him, trying out recipes she had never dared attempt before. They rode out into the desert together, exploring the vast landscape and discovering hidden springs and ancient rock formations. Spring came to Arizona, bringing wildflowers and warm breezes. Beatrice found steady work as a seamstress, with enough customers now that she could support herself comfortably. She repaired the house, replacing the broken window and painting the walls. The garden began to flourish under her care, producing tomatoes and peppers and squash. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt like she was building a life rather than just surviving. One warm evening in May, Nathan came by with a proposal that had nothing to do with marriage. "The Cross T is looking to hire a foreman," he said. "The job comes with a house, a good one with 3 bedrooms and a real kitchen. Matthew offered it to me, and I accepted. I want you to see it before we set a wedding date. Make sure it is somewhere you would be happy living." The house was perfect, a solid adobe structure with a covered porch and views that stretched for miles. It had been empty for 2 years, since the last foreman left to start his own ranch, and it needed some work, but Beatrice could see its potential immediately. She walked through the rooms, imagining curtains on the windows and rugs on the floors, imagining children playing in the yard and meals shared at the big kitchen table. "What do you think?" Nathan asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "I think it is wonderful," Beatrice said, leaning back against him. "I think we could be very happy here." "So we set a date." She turned in his arms and smiled up at him. "Yes, let us set a date." They married in late June of 1879, a year almost to the day after Thomas had been hanged. The ceremony was small, held at the Cross T Ranch with Catherine and Matthew serving as witnesses. Judge Harrison, who had become a friend after his role in clearing Thomas's name, performed the ceremony. Beatrice wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself, with lace trim and the turquoise necklace Nathan had given her. Nathan wore his best suit, his hair slicked back, his hands trembling slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "I promise to love you and honor you all the days of my life," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise to stand by you in hard times and good times, to be your partner and your friend, to build a life with you that is full of joy and laughter." "I promise to love you with all my heart," Beatrice replied, tears streaming freely down her face. "I promise to be faithful and true, to support your dreams and share your burdens, to create a home with you where love and kindness always dwell." They kissed as husband and wife, and Beatrice felt something inside her that had been broken for so long finally begin to heal. The first year of their marriage was full of adjustments and compromises, but also deep happiness. Nathan proved to be everything Beatrice had hoped: kind, patient, passionate, and devoted. He never made her feel guilty about her past or her grief for Thomas. Instead, he honored that part of her history while helping her build something new. Beatrice threw herself into making their house a home. She sewed curtains and quilts, planted a vegetable garden and flower beds, learned to cook the dishes Nathan loved best. She also continued her seamstress work, taking commissions from women all over the territory. The money she earned was hers to do with as she pleased, and Nathan never questioned how she spent it. He treated her as an equal partner in all things, asking her opinion on ranch matters and listening seriously to her ideas. They talked about children but agreed to wait a year or two, wanting time to be just the two of them first. Those early days of marriage were precious, filled with discovery and passion. Nathan taught Beatrice to ride better, taking her on long trips through the desert where they would camp under the stars and make love in their bedroll. Beatrice taught Nathan to read better, spending evenings curled up together while she helped him work through the newspaper or a dime novel. They learned each other's habits and quirks, the small annoyances and endearing qualities that make up a life shared. The town of Fort Bowie continued to change. The Morrisons sold their ranch and left the territory, unable to recover from the scandal. Smaller operations moved in, dividing up the land. A new sheriff was elected, a man who actually cared about justice. The railroad announced plans to build a spur line through the area, promising economic growth and new opportunities. Through it all, Nathan and Beatrice built their life together. They became pillars of the community, known for their generosity and fairness. When a young widow needed help after her husband was killed in a mining accident, they took her in and helped her find work. When a drought threatened the small ranchers, Nathan organized a cooperative system for sharing water resources. When the town wanted to build a school, Beatrice led the fundraising effort and donated money from her own savings. In the spring of 1881, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She had wanted children with Thomas, but that dream had died with him. Now, carrying Nathan's child, she felt as if she was being given a second chance at everything she had lost. Nathan was over the moon, immediately becoming protective and solicitous. He insisted she rest more, eat better, not work too hard. Beatrice tolerated his hovering with good humor, knowing it came from love. Catherine Cross became a constant presence, offering advice and practical help based on her own experiences raising 3 sons. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and on a cold December morning, Beatrice delivered a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas Nathan Emerson, honoring both the past and the future. Nathan held his son with shaking hands and tears in his eyes, promising to be the best father he could be. Watching her husband with their baby, Beatrice felt a profound sense of completeness. She had survived the worst that life could throw at her, and had come out the other side stronger, wiser, and surrounded by love. Thomas Fletcher's death would always be a scar on her heart, but it no longer defined her. She was Beatrice Emerson now, wife and mother, seamstress and rancher's partner, a woman who had fought for her dignity and won. Little Thomas was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Catherine Rose, after Catherine Cross and Beatrice's mother. Then, 3 years after that, came another boy they called James. The house that had once seemed too large was now full of laughter and noise, with toys scattered across the floors and children's drawings tacked to the walls. Nathan proved to be a wonderful father, patient and playful, teaching his children to ride and rope, to read and cipher, to treat all people with respect regardless of their station. Beatrice was equally devoted, instilling in her children the values of kindness, hard work, and standing up for what was right. Together, they created a family built on love and mutual respect, a family that became a model for others in the community. The years passed in a blur of birthdays and holidays, of cattle drives and harvest seasons, of storms weathered and triumphs celebrated. Nathan was promoted to manager of the Cross T, then bought a partnership stake in the ranch. Beatrice's seamstress business grew until she had to hire help, employing 3 other women and teaching them the trade. They saved their money carefully, investing in land and livestock, building a future for their children. Fort Bowie continued to grow and prosper. The railroad came through in 1885, bringing new businesses and new people. The town got a proper school, then a library, then a hospital. Beatrice served on the school board and helped found the library, donating books and organizing fundraisers. Nathan became a town councilman, using his position to advocate for fair treatment of small ranchers and miners. They never forgot what it had been like to be outcasts, to be shunned and persecuted for something they had not done. That memory informed everything they did, making them champions for the powerless and the wrongly accused. When a Chinese family faced discrimination from some of the townspeople, Nathan and Beatrice stood up for them publicly, inviting them to dinner and making sure their children were welcomed in school. When a black cowboy was cheated out of his wages by an unscrupulous rancher, they helped him take the case to court and testified on his behalf. Their children grew up strong and healthy, absorbing their parents' values and making them proud. Thomas Nathan became a lawyer, dedicating himself to defending those who could not afford proper representation. Catherine Rose became a teacher, educating children all over the territory. James took over the management of the Cross T when his father retired, running it with the same fairness and integrity Nathan had shown. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Nathan and Beatrice stood on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the desert. They were older now, with silver threading through their hair and lines etched around their eyes, but the love between them was as strong as ever. "You ever regret it?" Nathan asked, slipping his arm around her waist. Taking a chance on a wandering cowboy who did not have much more than a good horse and a kind heart, Beatrice leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Not for one single moment. You saved me, Nathan, not just from the town's cruelty, but from drowning in grief and bitterness. You showed me that life could be good again, that I deserved happiness." "You saved me too," Nathan said softly. "I was drifting before I met you, just going through the motions. You gave me purpose, gave me a reason to put down roots and build something lasting. You made me believe in love again." They stood together as the sky turned from orange to purple to deep blue, the first stars beginning to appear. Somewhere in the house behind them, they could hear their grandchildren playing, visiting for the anniversary celebration. The sound of young voices raised in laughter was music to their ears. "We did good, did we not?" Beatrice said. "With our life, with our children, with everything we built together." "We did real good," Nathan agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." As darkness fell over the desert, they went back inside to their family, to the warmth and light and love that filled every corner of their home. The path that had brought them together had been hard, marked by tragedy and injustice and pain. But it had also been worth it, because it had led them to each other, and to this life they had created through determination, courage, and an unwavering commitment to doing what was right. Beatrice Fletcher Emerson had come to Fort Bowie as a widow, shunned and despised, with nothing but a carpetbag and a broken heart. She had faced down prejudice and poverty, had fought for truth and justice, had refused to let the world's cruelty destroy her spirit. And in the end, she had found not just survival, but triumph. She had found love and family and a place where she truly belonged. Nathan Emerson had been a wanderer, a cowboy with no ties and no particular future. He had seen a woman in need and had done the simple, decent thing by helping her, never expecting anything in return. But that one act of kindness had changed his life forever, leading him to the love of his life and a family that gave his existence meaning and purpose. Together, they had proven that compassion could triumph over cruelty, that love could heal even the deepest wounds, that two people who chose to stand together could overcome anything the world threw at them. Their story became legend in Fort Bowie, passed down through generations as an example of what it meant to have courage and integrity, to love deeply and live fully. And on quiet evenings, when Nathan and Beatrice sat together watching the stars wheel overhead, They would hold hands and remember that dusty afternoon when a cowboy had tipped his hat and walked a widow home, and how that simple gesture of human decency had changed both their lives forever. They would remember the hard times and the good times, the struggles and the victories, and they would be grateful for every single moment, because those moments had led them to this. A life filled with love, a family to carry on their values, and a legacy of kindness that would endure long after they were gone. The years continued to roll by with the steady rhythm of seasons changing in the Arizona desert. Nathan and Beatrice grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year into something rich and complex, layered with shared experiences and unspoken understandings. They knew each other's thoughts before they were spoken, could communicate with a glance across a crowded room, finished each other's sentences without thinking about it. Their home became a gathering place for the whole family, especially on Sundays when children and grandchildren would descend en masse for dinner. Beatrice would spend all morning cooking while Nathan set up tables in the yard, arranging chairs, and making sure there was enough lemonade for everyone. The grandchildren would play in the garden Beatrice had nurtured for decades, the same garden where she had once struggled to coax vegetables from unwilling soil. Now it flourished with roses and hollyhocks, tomatoes and squash, herbs and fruit trees, a testament to patience and care. As Nathan entered his 60s, his body began to show the wear of decades of hard ranch work. His joints ached in the morning, and he moved a little slower than he used to. But his mind remained sharp, and his heart remained true. He still kissed Beatrice goodbye every morning and hello every evening. He still held her hand when they sat on the porch. He still looked at her with the same wonder and adoration he had shown on their wedding day. Beatrice, too, felt the passage of time in her bones and muscles. Her fingers, which had once flown through fabric with ease, now moved more slowly, occasionally stiffening with arthritis. But she continued to sew, creating quilts for each grandchild that told stories in fabric, each square representing a memory or a hope for their future. She had long since stopped taking commissions from strangers, but she still made dresses for Catherine and shirts for her sons, each stitch an act of love. They took up new hobbies in their retirement years. Nathan, who had never had much formal education, became an avid reader, working his way through the library Beatrice had helped establish. He particularly loved history and biography, fascinated by the lives of people who had shaped the world. Beatrice discovered a talent for painting, capturing desert landscapes in watercolors that friends and family treasured. The town of Fort Bowie had transformed from the rough frontier settlement they had first known into a proper town, with paved streets and electric lights. The railroad brought in goods from back east and carried Arizona copper and cattle to markets around the country. New buildings went up every year: a proper bank with marble columns, a hotel with indoor plumbing, shops selling luxuries that would have been unimaginable in the old days. But underneath the modern veneer, the spirit of the West remained, that sense of self-reliance and community that had always characterized the frontier. Nathan and Beatrice watched these changes with interest, but did not feel left behind by them. They had adapted as the world changed, embracing progress while holding fast to the values that had always guided them. They had electricity in their home now, and a telephone that rang at odd hours when the grandchildren called. They had even taken a train trip to San Francisco one year, marveling at the big city but glad to return to the wide open spaces they loved. On their 30th anniversary, the town threw them a celebration in the square. It seemed like everyone in Fort Bowie turned out to honor the couple who had become symbols of integrity and devotion. There were speeches and toasts, music and dancing, presents and well wishes. Young couples looked at Nathan and Beatrice with hope in their eyes, seeing proof that love could last, that it was possible to build a life of meaning and joy. During the celebration, Mayor Stevens, who had been just a boy when Beatrice first came to town, stood up to speak. 30 years ago, he said, this town made a terrible mistake. We judged Beatrice Fletcher based on fear and prejudice rather than on her character. We turned our backs on her when she needed us most. It would have been easy for her to leave, to shake the dust of Fort Bowie from her feet and never look back. But she stayed, and she showed us what real courage looks like. And Nathan Emerson, he showed us what real decency looks like when he stood by her side and refused to let her face the world alone. Together, they have made this town better, made all of us better. We are honored to have them as neighbors and friends. The crowd erupted in applause, and Beatrice felt tears streaming down her face. Nathan squeezed her hand and whispered in her ear, "We did not do it alone. We had help from good people like Catherine and Matthew, like Judge Harrison and Samuel at the telegraph office. It took a community to build this life. But you started it," Beatrice whispered back. "You were the first one to show me kindness when everyone else showed me cruelty. You changed everything." The celebration continued late into the night, with grandchildren falling asleep on blankets under the stars and adults dancing to fiddle music. Beatrice danced with Nathan, moving slowly in the circle of his arms, feeling the solid warmth of him against her. She thought about the terrified young widow who had stepped off the stage coach all those years ago, her world destroyed, her future uncertain. If she could speak to that younger self, what would she say? That the pain would pass, that happiness would find her again. That the darkest moments would eventually give way to light. Maybe she would simply say, "Hold on. Keep putting one foot in front of the other. Trust that there are still good people in the world and that love can bloom even in the hardest soil." As they entered their 70s, both Nathan and Beatrice's health began to decline more noticeably. Nathan's heart was weak, and the doctor warned him to take it easy, not to overexert himself. Beatrice's arthritis worsened, making it difficult for her to do the fine sewing she loved. But they adapted, finding new ways to enjoy their time together. They spent long afternoons reading to each other, Nathan's voice carrying the words while Beatrice listened with her eyes closed, painting pictures in her mind. They took short walks around their property, moving at a pace that accommodated creaky joints and uncertain steps. They sat on the porch for hours, watching the play of light across the desert, content simply to be together. Their children tried to convince them to move into town, to a smaller house where help would be closer at hand. But Nathan and Beatrice refused. This was their home, the place where they had built their life together, and they intended to stay as long as they were able. Their children compromised by making sure someone checked on them every day, and by hiring a young woman named Sarah to help with cooking and cleaning. Sarah was a recent widow herself, her husband killed in a mining accident, and Beatrice saw so much of her younger self in the young woman's grief and determination. She took Sarah under her wing, teaching her to sew and sharing the hard-won wisdom of someone who had survived the worst and found joy again. Nathan offered Sarah's teenage son a job on the ranch, giving the family the stability they desperately needed. History echoed, kindness rippling forward across the generations. On a warm spring morning in 1906, Nathan woke early and watched the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. Beatrice was still sleeping beside him, her breathing soft and steady. They had been married 27 years, and he still felt a thrill of wonder that this remarkable woman had chosen to share her life with him. He thought about all they had experienced together, the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and trials. He thought about their children and grandchildren, about the life they had built from nothing but love and determination. His chest tightened with a familiar pain, and Nathan knew his time was growing short. The doctor had told him months ago that his heart could give out at any time, that he should prepare his affairs and his family. But Nathan was not afraid. He had lived a good life, a full life, and when his time came, he would go peacefully knowing that he had loved well and been loved in return. Beatrice stirred beside him, opening her eyes and smiling when she saw him watching her. "Good morning," she murmured, reaching for his hand. "Good morning, my love." Nathan brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I was just thinking about how lucky I am." "We are both lucky," Beatrice said, struggling to sit up. Nathan helped her, arranging pillows behind her back. "We found each other when we both needed finding." They had breakfast on the porch, watching hummingbirds dart among the flowers. Sarah brought them coffee and fresh bread, chatting about her son's latest accomplishment at school. The morning passed peacefully, marked by small rituals and quiet companionship. That afternoon, as they sat in the shade reading, Nathan felt a sudden sharp pain in his chest. The book dropped from his hands and Beatrice looked up in alarm. "Nathan, what is wrong?" He could not speak, could barely breathe. The pain was enormous, crushing. Beatrice called for Sarah, who ran for the doctor, but Nathan knew it was too late. He reached for Beatrice's hand and held it tight, looking into her eyes and trying to convey everything he felt, all the love and gratitude and joy she had brought to his life. "I love you," he managed to whisper. "Always." "I love you too," Beatrice said, tears streaming down her face. "Please do not leave me." But Nathan Emerson had never broken a promise to his wife, and he did not intend to start now. His last conscious thought was a promise that he would wait for her, that wherever his soul went next, he would be there when her time came, ready to take her hand and continue their journey together. He died with his head in her lap, her fingers stroking his hair, surrounded by the life they had built together. The funeral was the largest Fort Bowie had ever seen. People came from all over the territory to pay their respects to a man who had been respected and loved by everyone who knew him. They told stories about Nathan's kindness, his integrity, his quiet strength. They talked about how he had stood up for the powerless and befriended the friendless, how he had treated every person with dignity regardless of their station. They spoke of his devotion to his wife, how he had loved her with a constancy and depth that inspired everyone around them. Beatrice sat through it all in a daze of grief, held upright by her children on either side. She could not quite believe that Nathan was gone, that she would never hear his voice again or feel his arms around her. The world seemed to have lost all color and warmth, becoming a gray place she had to navigate alone. But she was not alone, not really. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her with love, making sure she ate and slept, sitting with her through the long nights when grief made sleep impossible. Catherine Cross, now in her 80s herself, came to stay for a few weeks, providing the comfort of an old friend who understood loss. The townspeople brought food and flowers, offers of help and words of sympathy. Slowly, painfully, Beatrice began to heal. The sharp edge of grief dulled into a constant ache, and she learned to live with the absence of the man who had been her partner for nearly 3 decades. She found purpose in her grandchildren, in teaching them to sew and sharing stories about their grandfather. She painted more, capturing memories in watercolor. She wrote letters to her children and friends, her words carrying wisdom earned through a lifetime of joy and sorrow. She lived for 7 more years, years marked by both happiness and loneliness. She celebrated births and weddings, grieved losses and disappointments, watched the world continue to change around her. The automobile came to Fort Bowie, and the telephone became commonplace. Women got the vote, and Beatrice cast her ballot with pride, thinking of all the women who had fought for that right. The world moved forward, and she moved with it, even as her steps grew slower and her body weaker. On a quiet evening in 1913, Beatrice sat on her porch watching the sunset. She was 82 years old, and she knew her time was nearly done. Her children wanted her to move in with one of them, but she had refused. This was her home, hers and Nathan's, and this was where she wanted to be at the end. Sarah, who had stayed on all these years as companion and helper, brought her tea and sat beside her. "Beautiful evening," Sarah said. "It is," Beatrice agreed. "I never get tired of these sunsets. They are different every night, but always beautiful." "You are thinking about him," Sarah said gently. It was not a question. "I always think about him, both of them, really. Thomas and Nathan, the two men I loved." Beatrice sipped her tea, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. "I was lucky to have them both in their own ways. Thomas gave me my youth and my first understanding of love. Nathan gave me my second chance and showed me that the heart can heal and love again. I would not trade either of those experiences for anything." "You have any regrets?" Sarah asked. Beatrice considered the question carefully. "I regret that Thomas died so young, so unjustly. I regret the years Nathan and I lost because I was not ready to move forward, but the life we built together. No regrets at all. We loved well, we raised good children, we made a difference in our community. What more can anyone ask?" That night, Beatrice went to bed feeling peaceful. She dreamed of Nathan, young and strong, reaching out his hand to her. In the dream, she took his hand and found that she too was young again, the pain and weariness of age falling away. They walked together into a golden light, and Thomas was there too, smiling and welcoming, no anger or jealousy, just happiness that she had lived fully and loved well. Beatrice Fletcher Emerson died in her sleep, a smile on her face, her heart finally at rest. Her children buried her next to Nathan on a hill overlooking the Cross T Ranch, with a view of the desert they had both loved. The headstone reads simply, "Beloved wife, mother, and friend. She loved well and lived bravely." The story of the widow and the cowboy became part of Fort Bowie's history, told and retold over the years. It became a reminder that kindness matters, that standing up for what is right is always worth the cost, that love can bloom in the hardest circumstances. Young couples would visit their grave and make wishes for relationships as strong and true as the one Nathan and Beatrice had shared. Their descendants carried on their legacy of compassion and integrity, passing down the values they had lived by. The house where they had raised their family eventually became a museum, preserved as an example of frontier life, and a monument to two people who had refused to let injustice and cruelty define them. Visitors walked through the rooms and saw Beatrice's watercolors on the walls, Nathan's books on the shelves, the quilt she had made and the furniture he had built. They saw the evidence of a life well lived, of love that had endured through every trial. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun set over the desert in shades of gold and purple, people claimed they could see two figures standing on the porch of the old Emerson house, hand in hand, watching the day end together. Whether it was ghosts or tricks of light, or simply the power of a story that had captured imaginations, no one could say for certain. But the vision brought comfort to those who saw it, a reminder that true love never really dies, that it echoes forward through time, inspiring and encouraging all who hear its story. The town that had once shunned a widow had learned its lesson well. Fort Bowie became known as a place where people looked out for each other, where strangers were welcomed and the vulnerable were protected. It became a community built on the values Nathan and Beatrice had championed: fairness, compassion, courage, and above all, love. And it all started with a simple gesture. A cowboy tipping his hat and walking a widow home, refusing to let her face the world's cruelty alone. That moment of kindness had rippled outward, changing not just 2 lives but an entire town, proving that sometimes the smallest acts of decency can have the most profound impact. That one person choosing compassion over cruelty can alter the course of history. Their story ended, but their legacy lived on, carried forward by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who knew that they came from people who had loved deeply, fought bravely, and lived with unwavering integrity. The Fletcher and Emerson names became synonymous with honor in that part of Arizona, and those who bore them carried the responsibility proudly, knowing they had a standard to uphold. In the end, Beatrice and Nathan's story was not really about tragedy or injustice, though those elements had been present. It was not even primarily about overcoming adversity, though they had certainly done that. At its heart, their story was about love, the power of love to heal, to strengthen, to inspire, to endure. It was about 2 people who chose each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the ashes of grief and loss. It was about hope persisting in the darkest times, about kindness triumphing over cruelty, about the human spirit's remarkable capacity to survive and thrive even in the harshest circumstances. And that is why their story was remembered, told and retold across generations, a testament to what is possible when 2 people commit to facing life together, supporting each other through every trial, celebrating each other through every joy, and loving each other with everything they have until the very end. Beatrice and Nathan Emerson had shown Fort Bowie and everyone who came after what true love looked like, and in doing so, they had left the world a little better than they found it. That, perhaps, is the finest legacy anyone can leave.